Hello. So,
Hey,
good
how are you?
Asif. And those of you who are tuning in, it is 9 p.m. Dhaka time. I believe this makes it 10 a.m. Is that right? 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, perhaps?
Sounds
And
right.
most of our friends and who've been following the U.S. election have got a good night's sleep and they've woken up, and it seems as though we have more clarity than we had when perhaps people went to sleep. Asif, what do you notice? We last talked several hours ago. Things different from the way you had thought they would be a few hours ago?
I mean, the big thing that we're seeing now is that the big blue wall is likely to stand. I was just reading an article in the New York Times. I think it's Nate Cohn who was giving us the numbers on how Pennsylvania is likely to break for Biden. I think you were doing the numbers earlier. I was looking at some of your Facebook posts about Michigan and Wisconsin. I'll let you talk about that. But it also looks like Nevada so Nevada is likely to go to Trump as well. I mean, to
Sure. But
Biden as well.
let's look at the numbers. Now, of course, it's confusing because different people are calling different numbers. So we have, the Guardian is calling 238 electoral college votes for Biden. ABC News is saying 225. The differential there is 11 votes for Arizona. And I think while it seems very likely that Biden will win Arizona, it's perhaps premature to call it, seeing as it's only 82% of the votes have been counted. And he's well ahead, but it may be premature. And I think the other differential is two electoral college votes in Maine, which I think is actually fairly certain, again, that Biden will win. So I think the 238, which you're seeing, seems pretty much on the money, and 213 for Trump. So then what is left? I mean, the big ones are, of course, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And all three of these had been in Trump's column, except everyone knew that they were going to be, that you couldn't really look at the numbers in isolation because mail-in votes were going to be coming in as they have been coming in. Interestingly enough, and we've got a story on this up at Dhaka Tribune, the state legislatures in those three states, they could have passed a law, which the Democrats wanted them to do, saying that we can start counting before Election Day, which is, of course, what they've done in other states such as Florida and North Carolina, which is, of course, why these other states have been able to finish counting much quicker. But in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, they did not change the law, and they said you can only start counting on Election Day, which is why it's taking so long. And I think the suspicion is that they did this precisely so it would look as though Trump was winning these states, and that when he is overtaken, it looks like there's some shenanigans, which is exactly kind of what the president is trying to imply is going on. But now, if you look at Michigan, I think just recently Biden took the lead. He'd been lagging behind in Michigan right from the start, but I think he has a lead of about 10,000. He has a lead of about 20,000 in Wisconsin, with I think very few votes left to count. Now, Pennsylvania, I do think is tricky because it seems as though he has an awfully big hill to climb and not too many votes left to do it. What are the latest numbers you're seeing? The last I saw was 1.4 million votes.
That's what I saw too, and that's as of 5 a.m. Eastern. No, it was updated 9:29 a.m. Eastern, so not too long
so that's
ago.
very recent then. Okay, so 1.4 million, and the differential is how many votes?
Hold on, let me take a look. So it's the New York Times article. They're basically saying that the president was leading with 700,000 votes in Pennsylvania as of 5 a.m. But for absentee voters in Pennsylvania, Biden won 78% to 21%. And so if that holds over the next 1.4 million votes that need to be counted, then about 800,000 votes will go to Biden. And so
he will make up the deficit. I still think it's a tough hill. I mean, it's not over. It's possible, but I would say right now, it's very much in the balance. But the interesting thing is, even if he does not win, Biden does not win Pennsylvania, he will still get 270 votes, which is enough. We're just being joined. I'm going to add renowned, eminent journalist Tunku Varadarajan to the stream. Thanks for joining us. I know you are. We're taking time away from your cricket watching schedule, so no greater love does Tunku have that he will stop watching cricket to actually discuss something with Asif. And do you know Asif, Tunku?
I do not.
I'm not sure if you ever met.
Can you hear me?
He was the planning editor at Dhaka Tribune, and now is what we know in Bangladesh as a senior journalist.
Well, nice to meet you. I possibly met you when I visited, but there were so many people that I met that, and I'm getting old now. So
that's right. I can't remember whether Asif was with us at the time when you did come to the office and spent a little time at Dhaka Tribune. But this is great. I hope you're sort of well refreshed. It's the morning for you in New York, and tell us a little bit. I mean, I suspect for you the day looks far different, very different from what it looked, what last night looked like. Or were you actually expecting what we're seeing this morning?
Well, first of all, let me just point out, you spoke of my making a sacrifice to be on this. Just to emphasize the sacrifice, I was watching, and I'm no longer watching, Jahanara Alambo. So,
I see.
I have a very soft spot for her.
Okay, well, indeed, that is a sacrifice, and we are flattered and honored.
But back to your question, the reason why I look like death is that I've been up pretty much all night, so your viewers shouldn't be turned off by my appearance. I hope my thoughts will be a little more elevating.
And you're looking fine as well, Tunku, I have to say. So I think you do yourself an injustice.
Well, you're much too kind. But look, I think just random thoughts. You don't want anything particularly structured for me at this stage.
No, absolutely. Just what as our man on the ground.
Well, I think this seems in many respects like a replay of 2016. In that the Democrats and the media, which in many cases is a kind of extension of the Democratic Party, seem to have completely misread the mood of the American people. I mean, the polls have been proved to be quite inaccurate, not as spectacularly inaccurate as was the case with Hillary versus Trump. But if you look at Florida, which was supposed to have been in Biden's pocket by now, Trump won extremely comfortably there.
Quite healthily, yes.
And I think, if I'm not mistaken, he won Florida more comfortably than he did in 2016. So
that is correct, yeah.
Which is quite striking, and especially as the polls had Biden comfortably ahead. People are attributing this to the energizing by Trump of the Cuban and Venezuelan communities in Miami, who are reputed to be reflexively anti-left, anti-communist. And, there was probably a quite successful painting of the Democratic Party as being a kind of redoubt of radicals, socialists, AOC, Elizabeth Warren, basically all, Hugo Chavez.
That plays very well in Florida, I think, yes.
Yeah. Elizabeth Warren is Nicolas Maduro in drag. And, and so I think, they were spooked. I don't think the Democrats were prepared for that. The Democrats their views on race tend to be a little monolithic. They assume, Latino is Democrat without differentiating between a Puerto Rican and a Mexican and a Venezuelan and a Cuban. So they have these kind of pigeonholes for ethnic minorities, and every now and then the pigeonhole kind of surprises us. And so, so I think that's what's happened. I'm going to stop there because
absolutely, and it's not just in Florida. I mean, I think two things which are interesting. One, I think at this point it is looking like Biden is going to eke out a victory. However, for those of whom the people who are looking for this election to be a repudiation of Donald Trump, I think we'll have to be very disappointed, because it was many things, but it certainly was not that. And I think that's what the media was certainly hoping for. And, there'd been a little bit of a narrative created over the last couple of days before the election that, there might be a landslide, there might be a blue wave. And it's very interesting. It's not just, again, if you look at what's happened in the House and Senate, they've been, the projections are quite off as far as that goes. And just recently, I saw information as to the voter breakdown in terms of, race and gender. And Trump has actually done reasonably well across the board. You see, of course, he has a disproportionate number of white men and white women voting for him. But, he's done reasonably well for a Republican presidential candidate among black men. He's even got 8 or 9% of the black African-American female vote, which is extremely high for a Republican candidate. And with the Latino vote, again, he's done quite well. And I think this is not just not just in a state like Florida. It seems that across the board, the notion that the Latinos are a monolithic voting bloc for the Democratic Party is something which may need to be re-examined, certainly in light of this today's election, or yesterday's election.
Yeah, it's long been said by the more thoughtful Republicans that the Latino community has always been sort of ripe for the picking, because the values that they are thought or stereotyped to espouse, family, industry, stability, dinner around the dining table at night.
And they're more religious, and that religion is largely Catholicism.
Exactly.
Which is a fairly,
nuclear
certainly in America, a conservative faith.
Yeah, exactly. And so yes, it's the Latino community has always been the sort of elusive prize for the Republican Party, and I guess the Republicans have also failed to see that on the debit side, as far as the Latinos are concerned, is that aura that the party has had over the last few years of being unhelpful to or hostile to immigrants. And so you have that on the debit side, and you have the Republican Party's shared values with the Latino community on the credit side. But of course, I think some of these values matter more to some Latinos than to others. For the Mexican American voter, the hostility to immigration perhaps rankles more than it does to the Venezuelan and the Cuban, who do not feel that hostility from the American establishment. They're positively embraced by the American establishment because they come from countries that are regarded as hostile to the U.S. And so,
I mean, certainly their self-image is very different, let's say, than someone who's maybe Puerto Rican or someone who's Mexican. Also, if I could bring you in on this, I think this is a point you made earlier today, Bangladesh time, because when we were at the start of this broadcast.
Right. I mean, so we spent quite a bit of time actually talking about this very issue, and I was just actually trying to call up a bit of information to just jump in. But I mean, it's worth noting that as recently as 2004, Bush took 40% of the Latino vote. So not very long ago. I mean, there have been so many shifts. I mean, we've seen just in the last 20 years, the Rust Belt states, that have traditionally been sort of democratic strongholds because of trade unionism and everything else, find that the party that they belong to, because, well-educated progressives have, taken it over, find that the Democratic Party no longer connects with their values. I was watching this really interesting interview where this white American working class voter in Pennsylvania saying my values haven't changed, but the Democratic Party's values have changed. And so that's one thing at play. The other thing is, of course, the Latinx community is quite diverse, and they all have a whole different set of sort of histories and a whole different set of values that are informing the way they're voting. And I agree completely that, Florida was completely misread. But I mean, as even a week ago, it was looking like the polls were showing that Cubans were, 71% breaking for Trump, whereas Puerto Rican and other Latinx or Spanish-speaking communities in in Florida were 61% Biden. So I mean, it was already becoming clear that this sort of monolithic view of the Spanish-speaking community wasn't going to work. But I mean, again, Republicans have been able to pull in a fair amount of Spanish-speaking voters, the Latinx community, and probably for the reasons you're talking about. The commitment to sort of family values, the fact that many people in America who belong to the sort of conservative movement are they're issue publics, so it's abortion and these are traditional sort of Catholic concerns.
Yeah,
and so it makes sense. It makes sense.
Let's bring it back to this sort of current election, because I think what is happening now is, of course, what everyone told us was very likely to happen, which is that we would see an early lead for President Trump, and then as the mail-in ballots are being counted, that lead would dwindle and maybe be overtaken. And that seems to be what has happened in the states of Michigan and Wisconsin. It may be happening in Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is still too close to call. I understand most of the uncounted mail-in votes are from counties which are traditionally heavily Democratic. Nevertheless, it does seem to be a big margin to overcome. I think it's 600,000 votes at this stage, perhaps, with 1.4 million votes left to be uncounted. I mean, it's doable, but I wouldn't take it to the bank. Of course, even without Pennsylvania, if Joe Biden wins Michigan, Wisconsin, and if he also takes Nevada and Arizona, he should squeak through with 270 electoral college votes.
I think he has taken Arizona. It's been called for him.
Well, it depends. A lot of people are calling Arizona. It's been called, but then it's I wonder why, because only 82% of the vote has been cast there. But I think it's fairly safe to say he's going to win it. Yeah.
It was called. I mean, it was called for him by Fox News first. So.
Indeed, yeah. So they can't be wrong on this issue. Yes, that's in legal terms that would be an admission against interest. So one gives it a lot of credence.
I mean, if it had been called first by CNN or MSNBC, I would say, hang on a minute, but they probably knew what they were doing and that they would in fact incur some Trumpian wrath in doing so. But I'm with you. I think you used the word. Biden is that you use the phrase "eke out," and I think Biden is going to eke out a victory. My wish before all of this happened was that Biden would win. I have no instinctual sympathy for the Democratic Party, as you well know, but after 4 years of Trump, I'm ready for 4 years of something different. And I was hoping that Biden would. I was hoping that the polls would for once be correct, and that Biden would get to the White House, but that there would also be a Republican majority in the Senate so that Elizabeth Warren wouldn't rule the Senate. And so Mitch McConnell and Biden would sort of cancel.
You may get your wish. I mean, I think the Senate is too close to call at this stage. So
it's too close to call, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the instinctually, I have a sense, again, famous last words, that Biden will get the White House and the GOP will keep the Senate. And that will mean that I will then go to my local off license and buy myself a nice bottle of wine and come back home and drink it by myself in celebration. Yeah. But I don't know if one is allowed to say that on Bangladeshi TV.
You can do it, absolutely. Yes, you're far beyond the reach of. Well, I don't know. Of course, with the new Digital Security Act, I mean, it could be that falls foul of some obscure term. So I'll keep an eye. I'll look over my shoulder for the next.
Can I ask you, gentlemen, a question? Who are Bangladeshis rooting for, and who does Bangladesh think would be better for Bangladesh?
Okay, well, this is interesting. It's a question you put to some mutual friends of ours not long ago on Facebook. Right. For the most part, as far as I'm aware, Bangladeshis are they've traditionally been Democrats, and they're very strongly rooting for Biden over Trump. Though, of course, there was a marvelous picture which made the rounds of Bangladeshi Americans voting for Trump, and I think it was some business community from Queens, if I'm not wrong. But in general, Bangladeshis instinctively prefer the Democratic candidate over the Republican. I don't know if it goes anything beyond that, though. One thing which is interesting, among certain certain sort of type of Bangladeshi. So, for instance, my son is 17 years old. And, we've been having this discussion, and I pointed out it's going to be quite easier for him to go to university in the United States and be able to stay there and work for a few years if that's what he wishes to do, if Biden were to be president rather than Trump. So for someone like me, I have a very sort of narrow, selfish, familial interest in this, which may not be the case for many Bangladeshis. But I think a lot of Bangladeshis do, and this is from, not all walks of life, but certainly middle class and lower middle class Bangladeshis as well, have been immigrating to the US in steady stream, and some have been working there. So,
yeah.
Excuse me?
If I could just add to that, I actually found...
No, that would be something which would impact Bangladeshis. Asif, you want to come in on this?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to quickly say that I think that, during my reporting trip in 2016, what I found was that Bangladeshis, with a sort of tertiary, it kind of breaks down like the rest of America.
You're talking about. I think Tunku's question was about Bangladesh.
Oh, I see. Sentiment in Bangladesh as opposed to Bangladesh Americans. I see. I understand.
And I'm not sure. In terms of trade, in terms of what kind of relationship the governments would have. I always thought Trump missed a real trick, because what he should have done if he was really looking for a signature foreign policy position, which would be a repudiation of Obama, which is something he's very interested in. I thought he should have actually done this with Myanmar, because the opening up to Myanmar and the canonization of Aung San Suu Kyi was very much a democratic / Obama project. And I think it has gone catastrophically wrong. And I think he could have done a great job of recreating this one leg of Obama's foreign policy by saying, something, this is outrageous. They've only been able to do this because we've been coddling them. And, you've got Russia, you've got China on the one hand, and we're there holding their water. We should be on Bangladesh's side in this conflict. And, Bangladesh are the good guys and Myanmar are the bad guys. I thought he missed it after that.
No, I think perhaps. Although it's hard to picture Trump coming out vigorously in support of Muslim refugees, but it would.
Yes, I think maybe that was the sticking point.
It would, shall we say, be uncharacteristic. But
Well, as long as they're not refugees into America, what's his problem?
That's true. It's interesting. The Democrats, obviously, the caricature of the Democrats is that they are human rights skulls, and I think the sentiment in India, I suspect, particularly on in the sort of BJP. Oh, have we lost Asif?
We've lost Asif. I think his connection must have dropped. He'll join us again, I presume. Yeah. Okay. I see.
Especially on the sort of. Carry on.
Yeah, please. And he's back.
I thought it was something I said, Asif.
No, it's just a trouble with Wi-Fi.
Are you in Dhaka?
I am.
Yes.
I am.
Okay. So as I was saying, and I'll be brief, just comparing, since we're talking about Bangladesh and Trump and Biden, I thought I'd talk about India briefly because neighboring countries perhaps have a kind of similar attitude. But I think the difference is that the Indian establishment and the BJP side of things probably wishes quite fervently for a Trump victory, because there is this belief in India that the Democrats are human rights goals, and there's a fear that if Biden wins, the more radical elements of the Democratic Party will unleash themselves on Kashmir and other issues like that, and so they'd much rather do business with Trump, who thinks the air in Delhi is filthy, but at the same time is just.
Our good friend Sutherland pointed out he's not entirely wrong when he says that.
He's not entirely wrong. In fact, he's entirely correct. I think most Indians would have said, why, the paradox is that Indians who have to breathe this filthy air and complain about it on a daily basis, put their sort of patriotic knickers in a twist over Trump's calling their air filthy. Irony of it all. But I think Indians on the right are probably rooting for Trump. The Congress types are probably rooting for Biden. But I think this human rights thing is a sort of old caricature. of course, in Bangladesh, you have reason to remember the Republican Party is the party of Nixon and Kissinger. So, so you can see why there's a sort of
I think, and closer to closer to the present day, I mean, people still do remember the role played, and they do see it because, of course, you have Ted Kennedy, for instance, who is, well beloved in Bangladesh, because he was kind of had a pro-Bangladesh role in 1971, and so people remember that. But closer to the present time, you also have the Gulf War, which people generally think of as a Republican war. They think of it as a George W. Bush war. The Democrats, to the extent that the imbroglio in Syria is something which you could lay at their door, is something they seem to have escaped censure for. So that doesn't seem to have really stuck against them. And of course, a lot of people do say that, Trump has been relatively good compared to other presidents when it comes to foreign adventurism, but that doesn't really won him much points in Bangladesh, I don't think.
Yeah, but exactly. But I think we didn't. My sense is that whoever wins in international affairs is going to, of the conventional kind, is going to take a back seat for the next 6 to 12 to 18 months.
What the truth of the matter is, Tunku, and this is really what it really sort of comes down to, if you don't mind me saying, is that Bangladesh is not very high up on any U.S. president's list of priorities, so it really doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of difference. America has an India policy, and depending on whether it's a Democratic president or a Republican president, that policy may well actually change to some extent. But America doesn't have a Bangladeshi policy.
Right. No, I think America's India policy is actually surprisingly unchanging from party to party. Clinton pushed past the baton onto Obama, who passed it on to Trump. And, we've seen a kind of growing convergence, certainly of security interests between India and the United States. You have the Quad and you have various other things.
Yeah.
The sort of trade, there's been some trade turbulence under Trump, but then India is the only country with which the US has had trade turbulence. I think Bangladesh, being a kind of an export-oriented economy, is probably right to be concerned about American sort of mercantilism and isolationism on the trade front. But I'd be interested to see whether Bangladeshi Americans, who are growing in numbers and growing in prosperity, come to play a role in US policy and opinion forming, similar to the role that's now played by Indian Americans.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, the non-resident Indian, and not just in the US, but also all over the world, I think largely perhaps in the US, has had a massive role in sort of turning India into the country it is over the last several decades. For whatever reason, and I haven't really been able to figure out how and why that is, it's possible that so far our communities, Bangladeshi communities, overseas are not as wealthy, and that may have a part of it, haven't really had that same impact on Bangladeshi politics. But again, maybe it's just a question of relative wealth, and maybe that is changing.
Yeah. I don't know. I think Asif, you know about Bangladeshi Americans.
Yeah, you were going to say something about that. So because Asif, I think this is 4 years ago now, but he went on this pre-election trip in 2016, which was.
No, I was only going to say. Yeah, I was only going to say that to add to your conversation, that well-educated Bangladeshis in the States, tend to they don't think about it. They think they identify as Democrats, whereas a lot of the people that have gone on diversity visas and work in stores and drive cabs, they, on the other hand, at least in 2016, told me that they were going to give Trump a try. I don't know how that works out, but I mean the numbers are not. Yeah, they like to, they thought that this is a business guy, and they wanted, they have these aspirational sort of, a sense that they might one day become fairly successful businessmen themselves. So Trump was
the important thing with someone like Trump, as also with someone like Modi, and I've always found it's very interesting, is that a lot of my liberal friends, especially friends in the media, are unable to explain the phenomenon. And I feel that's such a, it's kind of a dereliction of your duty as a journalist. You should be able to explain the phenomenon. You don't have to like Trump to be able to understand why other people like him. You don't have to like Modi to understand why he appeals to other people. Now we have been joined by Nadir Rahman, who is from the New York bureau of the Dhaka Tribune, since I haven't been successful in securing Tunku's allegiance. Well, you know, because Tunku has many other arrows in his quiver. But Nadir, good to have you back.
Good to be back. What an interesting morning. From 5 a.m. till about 9 a.m. it turned out.
More positive than let's say 12 hours ago or even 6 hours ago.
Oh my God, so much so. It's like more positive. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to be impartial. It is definitely more positive for the Democrats. I mean, these late-breaking votes in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, specifically Pennsylvania, where I went to bed last night at 3 a.m. I saw President Trump's address, which was honestly, we can have a whole show about that 5-minute long address.
We should actually talk about that, yes.
Yeah,
we'll come to that after this.
Yeah, but so when I went to bed at 3 a.m. last night, Joe Biden was down by 700,000 votes in Pennsylvania. And while it turns out this morning, of course, Wisconsin and Michigan have opened up for him with very slim margins. In Wisconsin, it's 20,000 votes. We're talking the same numbers that Donald Trump won it by in 2016. Michigan just edged in front there. I'm not sure what the total percentage points or what the numbers are.
It's about 10,000 votes last I checked.
Exactly.
But the trends are all going in Biden's direction, you see. So, I mean, so for instance, if we're talking about Michigan, you see, not long ago, there were 1 million votes to be counted, and Trump was ahead by 200,000. So now there's 500,000 to be counted, and Biden is ahead.
Yes.
So
I think the trend line is very easy to see right now. It is trending towards potentially a squeaky Biden win. But truthfully, it's got to be a crushing blow to the Democrats, where it seems quite guaranteed right now that they will not take the Senate. I think they might have gained at this point in time 12 in the House, and just scrape through with 270.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, they'll probably win, but it's hardly a trial. Let me also welcome to the stream Qazi Anis Ahmed, the publisher of Dhaka Tribune, and I think we kind of have a full house here. I mean, everyone knows everyone at this stage. And yes, we were just commenting on. It seems as though Biden is, squeaked by the narrowest of margins. Now that margin may, of course, increase. You're fairly bullish on his chances in Pennsylvania. Is that right, Anis?
Yeah, I think it's still possible because there's a lot of mail-in votes that they started counting only 8 in the morning today. And I don't think we'll know what's there for another hour or 2 or 2-3 hours. And the expectation is that those are heavily pro-Biden, so you never know.
Yeah,
but
and
at this point,
it may take up until tomorrow. I mean, it's going to take a long time to count those votes.
That's right. That's right. And a lot of votes are going to be from the Pittsburgh area and other areas like that, which are also.
Yeah. And of course, there is a case which has been filed in federal court to do with the vote count in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania. So let's see. I don't know if any of these court cases will have any teeth, but we'll have to wait and see on that.
Can I just greet the sage of Dhaka?
Hello, Tunkuji. Good to see you. I'm so glad you joined Dhaka Tribune.
I'm always. It's my favorite newspaper.
There you go.
Thank you.
How's that for an endorsement?
And I'm so delighted to hear that you have a New York bureau. I hope Nadir and I can have a cup of coffee or lunch together sometime.
Fantastic.
Definitely.
And he can put it on expenses.
We have bureaus all over the world. I have a London bureau as well.
That's right.
Bureau largely notional.
But I would like to actually discuss one thing which has been discussed, I guess, 1,000,000 times over, about the low bar that President Donald Trump sets for what he says publicly. Last night's speech was astonishing. At 2:30 in the morning, his time, he gets up. He spoke for I think 7 or 8 minutes, he lists off all the states where he was currently ahead, saying he should win them. He listed Georgia. I think Georgia finally eventually went to him. And then he went out and said, for all intents and practical purposes, I've won. Now, he didn't go out and actually say a declarative statement. I believe that I have won this election, or I have won this election. He, in a slightly roundabout way, said it. And this morning, this is the low bar we have set. A lot of people, at least on TV and in print, are like, okay, but Trump didn't actually say he won. And it pains me that this is the bar that's been set, that because he didn't say it in a declarative statement, because he said it in a roundabout way, they want to give him some credit for that.
Well, there was I didn't see any roundabout there. I thought it was a hectoring, assertive, bully boy declaration that he won. And God help those who disagree with him.
Exactly, and there was actually a lovely op-ed in the Washington Post this morning, which, if you let me look down on my phone and read it, which really got to the heart of what was being said, and like cut through everything. One of the few. I'm going to read a couple of lines from it. 1 second, sorry.
It's not by
while Nader, sorry, while Nader is looking that up, I would actually love to place a question to Tunku, because compared to sort of what we've been seeing in the mainstream, one might say the more liberal media in recent weeks, there was this almost expectation of a sort of resounding repudiation of Trumpism. And I think even if Biden squeaks a win, and especially with the Senate probably not changing hands, it's safe to say that there has been no such resounding repudiation of Trumpism. There is maybe a kind of measured restoration, but not a repudiation that's wholesale, which means a lot of Americans, tens of millions of them, are still happy with what Trump represented or Trump's GOP. And I'm wondering what you make of that. Does it speak to certain deficits in the Democratic platform that's failing to connect with the general population, or what is it?
Yeah, that's a tough question, Anis, but a good one as well, as tough questions often are. I think, it's certainly, I agree with you. If Biden squeaks through to the White House, it would not be a repudiation of Trumpism. And it wouldn't necessarily be an endorsement of the Democratic Party in the way that the Democrats themselves were looking for.
Right.
It would simply be a confirmation of the seemingly unbridgeable divisions that we now have in this country. And I see, America used to be a country where with a politics of gradation. You had far right, you had far left, and you had a gradation that somehow connected the nodes. Now you see, now it's a country where the politics is of chasms, and so you have. So what I see now is this is going to be the dispiriting norm. I think going forward, for at least a generation, we're going to see, even after Trump moves on to the great sort of casino in the sky, there's going to be a kind of.
Who's to say he won't be back in 2024?
Well, if Biden wins, then. I don't believe that he will necessarily be a one-term applicant because.
Oh, you think he's at 82 that he'll go for another term?
If he has a decent 4 years, and he isn't any more kind of mentally decrepit than he is right now,
that's a big if.
And he develops a taste for the White House, and power has a way to invigorate people. He may actually kind of acquire strength as he grows older.
Yeah.
Believe me, it's happening. Just look at emperors through history.
Yeah. Look at Mahathir Mohamad. Why are you so worried about an 81-year-old Biden?
Yeah,
exactly. And so
I think you can definitely run again at 81. Not a problem. 81 is the new 62 or 45 or whatever the
saying goes. Is whether Trump will run again. Trump is younger than Biden.
No, Trump. Yeah, Trump is interesting. If Trump loses, I think it's a very interesting question. Would be what is Trump going to do if he loses? What sort of presidential afterlife will he have? Where will he park himself? What will he do? How much will he tweet? How disruptive will he be?
I'd like to take a stab at that. I honestly believe, there's a famous saying over here that every single campaign, Republican, Democrat, whatever it is, eventually passes to the Upper East Side of Manhattan, Billionaires Row. That's what they say about every political campaign. I do believe most Republican campaigns will have to pay a stop at Mar-a-Lago. I do believe, in one sense, he could become a person who anoints kings and queens within the Republican Party, and he will have an outsized influence over there. And I can guarantee it, in 4 years' time, one of his children will, I'm not saying they'll get the nomination, will definitely go for it. Right now, it looks like either Don Jr. or Ivanka. I think Ivanka would be this is not my opinion. I think she would be a great choice for the Republicans to put forward. She is well-liked. And I think Donald Trump wields almost, not the same amount of power, tremendous amount of power being out of power. And he will really, truly anoint so many candidates. It's the bully pulpit of his Twitter account. It's something I hate talking about because I don't find it interesting to give it gravitas like that. If he tweets in support of someone, somebody can raise $1 million, $2 million across 2 days. That's something that it's astonishing. It's never existed before, a system like that.
I think he's not going to have a convention. You're so right, Nader. That's a very good point you make. He's not going to have a conventional retirement the way, say, George W. Bush has had, retiring to his rank.
He'll be clearing brush on his ranch, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I think he's also going to continue to try to keep playing in the political space, whether it's through launching a TV channel or other kinds of platforms or just the Twitter that he has, because he will want to be able to say that any cases, prosecutions against him are, quote, political. So a lot of what kind of traction he has is going to have, I think, depend also a lot on what happens with debts he is able to or not able to pay off, what happens with taxes that come home to roost, and what happens with maybe New York Southern District or other cases he may have. So it's not going to be also just that he's free to now just say whatever he wants on Twitter. He will have to play a lot of defense as well.
As they say, the best form of defense is offense. So keeping that in mind, clearly, retiring is not going to be for him. The more public a role he can take, the better actually it is for, as you mentioned.
But playing offense from the most powerful seat in the world is one thing, and playing offense once you've booted out of that office is going to be another thing. So I don't think it's going to be so easy for him, but yes, he is going to do unconventional things again, for sure.
Okay, so I'm going to make one last point because I have to go shortly because I have an 11 o'clock Zoom call for which I need to put a tie on. So here's, so here's the thing. I think Anis is right. I think Nader's point was excellent about Trump wanting to play the role of kingmaker and actually doing so. I'm not so sure we're going to get Ivanka or Don Jr. quite so quickly. We still have Pence to contend with and Nikki Haley, who also want the nomination in 2024.
And even dark horses like Pompeo. You never know.
I'm backing the Sadarni. But I think my last point, and then you have to forgive me, is that Anis spoke about his issues, legal, monetary, etc., debt-related. I think the Democrats would make a terrible mistake if, after winning the White House, they go after Trump in the manner of a criminal. I think they should just leave him alone. This reminds me of something that happened. I know that it's apples and oranges, but I'm going to make the comparison anyway. When the Janata Party coalition defeated Indira Gandhi after the emergency, they spent so little time governing and so much time going after the old lady, setting up the Shah Commission to investigate all her wrongdoings. It became an obsession, and it basically empowered Indira Gandhi to make a political comeback. And of course, it incensed Indira Gandhi's base. So the best way to ensure that the Trump flame keeps burning and that the rage of the Trumpies keeps burning would be for the Democrats to go after him if he loses. They should just leave him alone.
Yeah, don't make him a victim and let him be hoisted on his own petards, as the saying goes. Legal, financial, and other petards.
Exactly. So on that note,
thank you so much for joining us, Tunku. It's been great having someone from the ground in Brooklyn, someone of your eminence. I much appreciate it. And good luck on your Zoom call.
Thank you. And
you're looking very good. So you don't need to stick on a tie. You'll be perfect.
Joy Bangla.
Joy.
Okay,
see you, Tunku.
See you later. Nice to meet you guys, Asif and Nader, and so nice to see you again, Anis and Zafar. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
So I actually wanted to jump in on his point over here about, and I'm going to make a different point to what Tunku said. I feel bad that he left. I wanted to make it when he was around. I think if the Democrats squeeze through, they don't even have the moral authority to make a bunch of cases to like basically mount an incredible challenge to take Trump into jail. If they had won with a huge majority, if they had taken the Senate, I think the feeling, and I'm talking about intangibles over here, would have been so
That's absolutely right. I mean, they don't have, they barely have a mandate to govern. They certainly don't have a mandate to go after the last commander-in-chief. Richly, though, he may deserve it.
Yes, exactly. So I think that,
did you ever find that thing you were going to read out for us?
Okay, yeah. So it's actually the Washington Post, which I actually don't read a lot these days, but still. So this is Dan Balls at the Washington Post. This is what he wrote. 4 years ago, President Trump has sought to, for 4 years, President Trump has sought to undermine the institutions of a democratic society, but never so blatantly as in the early morning hours of Wednesday. His attempts to falsely claim victory and to subvert the election itself by calling for a halt to vote counting represents the gravest of threats to the stability of the country. Millions of votes remain to be counted, votes cast legally under the laws of the states. Until they are all counted, the outcome of the election remains in doubt, either for the former Vice President Joe Biden, who can win the Electoral College majority, but has not done so yet, no matter what he says. Those are the facts for which the president shows no respect. A president who respected the Constitution would let things play out. But Trump has shown once again he cares not about the Constitution or the stability and well-being of the country or anything like that. He only cares about himself and retaining the power that he now holds. Well,
so I'll tell you something. I mean, I think actually when all said and done, that speech he gave may have been the final nail in his coffin. I think actually a lot of people who were let's say in the Republican Party, let's say in conservative circles, this has kind of pushed him over the edge. I think it turned out to be a catastrophic blunder, a catastrophic error of judgment on his part. And I don't know, I mean, you're in the US, you're on the ground, but from what I'm seeing, I mean, perhaps some people are kind of walking it back and minimizing it, but it does seem as though, there's a lot of revulsion.
Yes.
There are a lot of people who feel, when you've got someone like Ben Shapiro coming out and criticizing his statement, I mean, these are, fairly conservative voices. There's a ton of them. I feel that that was his jumping the shark moment.
It was very odd. Like the timing of it was odd. And honestly, it seemed like he kind of wanted to get out there and say that when nobody was paying attention.
Well, I just saw on CNN Republican staffer said that he had a little tantrum beforehand, and he was like, and they tried to get him not to say it, but he wouldn't listen. And then he came out, and he just kind of went, went off the reservation.
I will say though, as we speak about this, and it seems like we seem to be speaking about the election in the past tense. It seems like it right now. Yeah. Things are trending towards Joe Biden. I still think there are a lot of votes to count. And a lot of things could still shake out. I think any sense of is completely misplaced. Is very, very misplaced at this very moment, 11 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time over here. But
if I could,
I actually want. Sorry, after you.
No, after you. I'm sorry. There's a lag. So
on to something. You mentioned that maybe Trump will try and create some kind of media powerhouse, try and create a media campaign, or some kind of basically a media version of the bully pulpit of like of the presidency. It's interesting how even in the last 3 months, even someone like like Matt Drudge has left him behind. I know it seems like a very small kind of inside baseball kind of a point to make. I think the moment Matt Drudge turned on Donald Trump, I think it was a much larger signal. Fox will never, at its essence, turn on him. But when Matt Drudge did that, I felt like this is something you can't walk back. And I do believe Matt Drudge, as what was that, how he was described, his aggregator of links is like server melting. It still is, maybe not as powerful as it was 8 or 10 years ago. But that moment, I think it made Trump realize that when he's out of power, he now needs to have his own access to the media, which means potentially creating.
And thanks to the laws of unintended consequences, Trump might want his own platform, but what he won't foresee right now, once he has his own platform, he'll actually be in competition with Fox and many other right-wing outlets. Mm-hmm. And the way he has been endorsed and promoted by them now won't actually play out in quite the same way when he's another player who might be cannibalizing their audience. Yeah. So there's going to be a lot of, yes, Trump is going to do a lot, get away with a lot. People who don't like him at all are going to be disappointed. Why is life not harder for him? And yet he's going to be in a world of agony. And I think we just saw a first glimpse of that yesterday when he gave that bizarre little statement. Because, for a deluded, narcissistic megalomaniac, whenever the realities of the world don't comply with their delusion, that is already a kind of pain that most of us ordinary people can't begin to fathom. So his suffering has already started, and people should just sort of be patient and sit back and watch. And as Tunku was saying, I think the Democrats would actually do well to focus on governance, to focus on delivering things that American people really want and need, the kind of leadership, compassion, constructive policies, etc. And that will be the best way for them to win, and not go after this demented man in a way that may make him into a victim and a martyr, even for his base.
So right. He's going to use the word victim and martyr. He's going to start using it.
And I'm not saying, I'm not saying that spare him dues that are due legally if there's a case that needs to go forward, but then let that district attorney run with it. Yeah. But don't turn it into a democratic shibboleth.
Asif, after you. Sorry, I feel like I've interrupted you.
I just want to. I actually have to go, so I just want to say two things. I'm going to take a sort of contrary opinion here. I actually think that
we're going to finish in 5 minutes anyway. So but please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I think that this Trumpism is going to go the way of the Tea Party, which is it'll fizzle out. And I think that it's really the similar kind of phenomenon. I mean, the Tea Party was able to, again, there were people who felt left out, and there was a lot of angst. They tapped into that. I think Trump did the same. I don't think Trump is the brand. And I think that while I agree with Anis Pai that he's going to try with some kind of a media empire of his own, I think it'll go the way of Trump Steaks. It's going to go the way of all of his sort of failed enterprises, because you're absolutely right.
Trump University.
Up that, exactly.
I said he will try. I didn't say he'll succeed.
Right. No, I agree. And I think it's going to fizzle out.
Yeah.
And so the note I want to end on is just to say that, I think, again, agreeing with all of you, if the Democrats are successful in engaging with those segments of the population that feel left out, they could, in fact, Trump is, I think Nabil Bhai said earlier today that when somebody loses an election, it doesn't take very long for people to stop caring what they have to say. And I think that's absolutely on the mark. And so when he loses, it's just going to be noise. And so there's going to be that
take the steam out so fast. Something else I just want to... Sorry, Asif.
No, that's fine. Yeah, go
ahead. I just want to throw out one other thing. Now that we're looking at the results, we feel like we're on the brink of a possible result. Very likely that Biden is squeaking through with just north of 270. There is, on the Democratic side, not really going to be a sense of triumph over this, because the scale of victory is so much lesser than what was hoped for. There's certainly going to be a relief. And in light of that, I would actually say that this itself is a call for Democrats to do some serious soul searching in terms of not why more people didn't reject Trump, but why didn't more people gravitate towards you? So there's still maybe things you can do differently. And what is it? And it's not good enough to say that the masses are stupid or they are racist, and if they only became as urban and cosmopolitan as we are, then we would have the votes. Well, guess what?
That's the fair point. And I personally believe the number one thing on their agenda should be healthcare. Like, I find it astonishing that Joe Biden went his entire campaign. The entire campaign was built upon his healthcare plan. I'm getting into the weeds just a little bit over here, was to expand Obamacare. I think Obamacare, it insured 13 million people. There was a Supreme Court decision, took it away from 10 million people. He wants to bring that back again. At a time when 250,000 people have died in this country. I keep saying this number, and I want to say it with some form of reverence. That's not a small number of people. At a time when everybody feels insecure about healthcare, whether you're Republican or Democrat, and I want to tap into this thing, take away this stigma of calling it socialized healthcare, call it whatever you want, but to pass comprehensive healthcare, I think you will have the backing of people who support Republicans as well. I'm not saying Republicans in the House or the Senate, but people who voted for Republicans will be on board for comprehensive healthcare reform. It should be a one agenda presidency. That's it. Healthcare.
I got to tell you, I mean, that may be there, but I can't help think after sort of seeing this election, just how deeply, deeply divided America is. And, I don't think, whether it's Biden who sits in the White House on January 20th, or whether somehow through some shenanigans Trump, makes his way back, which I think is looking extremely unlikely at this stage. I just don't think this is going to be an easy country to govern because, for instance, certainly the Dems can do a lot of soul searching as to what they didn't offer the voters and what they can offer. But, there's no unanimity on the answer. You've got a lot of people who have different theories about that, and their theories don't really have a great deal of overlap. And, none of the theories are entirely complete either. I mean, it could be that, America is becoming an increasingly more difficult country to govern. And I also think what's going to happen to the Republican Party after Trump is a question worth asking. I mean, I think, in fact, the next decade in American politics could be extremely turbulent and extremely unprecedented, because I think we are on the cusp of a kind of realignment, and I really don't know what things are going to look like when this realignment shakes out, and it might take a couple of presidential cycles, but I do believe that America is going to change dramatically in the coming decade.
Well, here's a shift that's already happened, if I can just jump in.
Sure, and this will have to be our last point, because we're running out of time. Go ahead.
Well, I'll make it really quick then, so that everyone else can have their bit, their closing comment. But the Democrats were the party of working class people 20 years ago, and something happened. The party intelligentsia and the party rank and file are now, there's a huge disconnect. Those same people now think that the party of big business, the Republicans, speak for them. They think that their main spokesperson is somebody who brags about having made billions and swindled the tax authorities because he's got clever lawyers. So you understand the shift has already happened. I mean, the Democrats really need to. The Republicans have basically done nothing but open up that space.
Can I speak to that very quickly?
There was already, yeah.
There's actually specific historic and structural reasons for that. One is the total decimation of manufacturing with the advent of globalization. Sure. And that compounded with Republican as well as other political muscle used to decimate unions. So it is the loss of that base that has contributed to the democratic disconnect with the working population. Republicans, on the other hand, ever since desegregation, have done a good job of convincing poor white people that Black people or other ethnics are their real enemy and not rich white people. Yeah, and Democrats are structurally at a disadvantage because to the extent they, quote, cater to a more diverse population, it's easy to frame them as friends of your enemies by the Republicans. And at a certain level, America where it's today, it's not the first time. One could argue that in the 60s, during the desegregation, the civil rights movement, the country was just as polarized. And the country did come to a new reality from that. What's interesting is that 60, 70 years later, it's still the same issue, race. That's America's original sin, and America still has to come to terms with that.
But Anisbhai, here's the interesting thing. Just about the manufacturing jobs, the Republicans, Republican non-labor states like Alabama and Georgia have absorbed many of those jobs, which is why a lot of these big corporations, Benz and BMW are manufacturing there. The Democratic Party took a long time to disentangle themselves from labor union politics, like a really long time.
Yeah.
And that lag in them coming up with their own new program has also given them that space. But I agree with you. At the end of it, race is the easiest card to play. It's what Trump played, and it's going to stick around for a while, I think.
And due to democratic shifts that are inexorable and apparent at this point, there is a kind of last gasp panic among many white people.
Yeah.
They know demographics are against them. The election of 2032, 36.
I mean, the problem of Trumpism may solve itself demographically over the next few decades. There was a lot of arguments saying that it was supposed to have happened already. There was a very famous book which came out some years ago, The Emerging Democratic Majority, which, and it could be that the book is entirely wrong, or it could be that the book was just premature. And if it's just premature, these problems will sort themselves out. I think that's all we have time for. Nader, if you have a closing comment.
I just want to reiterate what you said about I think the factions, the divisions that have been created across the last decade, and for me it's very specific, from Obama's first midterm, from the rise of the Tea Party now, exactly a decade. In the little piece I wrote for you, I mentioned Valencia County in New Mexico, how since 1952, somehow, astonishingly, they've always voted for the president.
So who did they vote for this time?
So I read a piece in Politico. I actually just wanted to paraphrase that piece where a gentleman went there. I think their chief political correspondent went there, spent 4 days over there. And he came away with the feeling that this is the 1 year since 1952 that Valencia County will not vote for who eventually becomes president. His theory was Valencia County is going to go to Trump and Biden will somehow eat through the presidency. And the larger point he made under that was, for 60 years, there have been places like Valencia County where people have swung, where voters have changed, moods have changed, and there was that scope for a vote to move from Democrat to Republican. But is this writer's view, where we stand right now, those things are becoming more codified. That Valencia County will vote Republican this time because there's no place left to swing. There's no little margin over there because of the polarization of the last decade. I think it was a very valid point. And when everything shakes out, I am interested to see how Valencia County votes. Actually.
Okay, super. Well, on that
note,
thank you, gentlemen. It's been a fine conversation. I think I'll actually get back and see if the polls have moved a little. I think it's going to be slow, and we're not going to get an answer, perhaps. Maybe there's an outside chance we'll get an answer today, which is Wednesday in the US, and probably early Thursday morning for us in Bangladesh. But it may actually go on for the rest of the week, so we'll have to wait and see. But it's very, very interesting times. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in. This has been Dhaka Tribune's 2020 US election coverage, and we will be back perhaps in the early morning Bangladesh time next, and maybe we'll have an answer then as well. Thank you very much, and thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, guys. Bye. Thanks, Alfred.
Thanks.
Okay.